You know that we could have one great hunting trip tonight?
Yeah, Mike, I don't know where the hell you come up with all this. Hey, wait a minute. What are you thinking of going deer hunting tonight? No, not tonight. I'm getting married tonight. You guys are going deer hunting? Hey,
Welcome to the Cinematic Flashback Podcast. Get ready to hop into the Wayback Machine as we journey through the wild, bold, and unforgettable films of the 1970s. Each episode, we break down a classic movie or forgotten gem by exploring the who's who of each film, diving into the premise and plot, seeing how it performed then and now, and wrapping things up by asking, did it groove through the decades or did it lose its beat? Today, we're reviewing The Deer Hunter from 1978, directed by Michael Cimino and starring Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken. I am your host, Chuck Bryan, and joining me is my co-host, fellow movie lover, and partner in crime, Matt Sargent. Happy New Year, man!
Yes, it's weird how that happens in our release schedule, but we definitely are super happy to be back and coming to you in season number 2.
And we are now covering our second movie about Vietnam, The Deer Hunter.
Yeah, this is the movie that I think of when you talk about a Vietnam movie. There have been some others later in later times, but I remember as a young person, it's funny, this movie came out in 1978. My brother graduated from high school in 1972. And I distinctly remember seeing the numbers for the Selective Service being printed in the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
It was the last 4 digits of your Social Security, or sort of like those are the ones they were pulling from. And I remember thinking that it was very real for us, even with me being kind of a young person in 1978. I wasn't that young. I guess I was about 17.
Well, this movie, even though it released in December of 78, it was a limited release. And you might can guess why.
Well, I think it's absolutely clear that it was so that it could get into the Academy Awards for that. I guess the Academy Awards are done in the winter, spring time frame. I actually remember it being released early. And the reason I remember it is my sister married a guy who he loved this film, and he really, really was into sort of he had friends in the military. He never served, but he had a lot of respect for the military and a lot of interest in Vietnam War. And I think we went and saw it. Possibly we saw it as soon as we could. So it was right when it was in wide release, or if it was in limited release where we were, which possibly it was. I don't know. We were in Northern Virginia, so D.C. area.
It might have been early. Yeah.
May have been early, because I do remember him being very excited about going and seeing it.
Yeah. I realized that this film, it went into wide release like early 1979, like February.
Right.
And I realized while preparing for this that Apocalypse Now released in August of 79. So in this year, there were 2 films about Vietnam.
Yeah, they were definitely a 1-2 punch about, sort of I don't want to say, it was sort of the reckoning of our involvement in Vietnam, kind of through film and popular history. It definitely was on a lot of people's minds. It was a big deal when a lot of people, I was talking to somebody today who was born in 2000 or something.
Wow.
I just it's so funny, us that are of a certain age, when you talk to someone who this is like, to them, through remembering those things that happened during the Vietnam War and after the Vietnam War, is like for us remembering what happened or thinking about, how our parents dealt with World War II.
Right.
In the Korean War, the Korean conflict and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just really, really an odd feeling on that. So I hope that we can relate to the people that are listening. If they're younger than that we can give them a little bit of the view of what it was like to be that age during that time when, at the beginning, nobody talked about Vietnam. It was just a taboo subject. And then this film came out, Apocalypse Now came out, and some other movies that came out that really pushed it to the forefront of everyone's reckoning. And obviously this film did a great job at that because, I mean, it was critically acclaimed and it hits with a lot of impact for sure.
Matt, who's talking with us today?
Well, we received a review on the Apple Podcasts platform from Dan the Man. So it looks like Dantho Man, but I'm going to give him the benefit of a doubt and say he was going for Dan the Man. Here's what Dan the Man says. Unbridled enthusiasm fueled by amazing knowledge of movies and culture, emphasized by creativity. I find myself smiling unexpectedly while listening and Googling names I've never heard of and then saying, oh yeah, I remember them.
Thank you so much, Dan the Man. We really appreciate that, and we thank you for the 5-star rating. That genuinely helps the show reach more fans of 70s cinema.
And keep those comments coming. We'll do our best to read them on the air. And obviously, the more effusive you are with your praise, the more likely it will be read on the air.
And don't forget, we're still looking to see if anybody else wants to listen to us talk about Eye of the Needle. So let us know.
Yes, please. I want to talk about Eye of the Needle.
We are about ready to get into The Deer Hunter. But first, we need to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
There's one scene in The Deer Hunter that I think a lot of people talk about, which is the Russian roulette scene. Christopher Walken and Robert De Niro have been captured by the Viet Cong, and they're being toyed with by a bunch of people that don't speak a word of English. They're asked to play Russian roulette with each other. And these are two boyhood friends. They've known each other their whole lives. And as each one passes the gun to the other, they have to anticipate that they're going to watch their best friend's head blow off. And with each click of the gun, their bond is cemented even more. I remember distinctly sitting in the movie theater and sort of weeping in the middle of this film at this scene and feeling as if I was going to be changed for the rest of my life, that it was a moment of filmmaking that was so true and so horrifying and so real that I would never be the same.
Welcome back. The Deer Hunter tells the story of the impact of the Vietnam War on 3 Slavic American friends from a small steel town in Pennsylvania. It actually is just outside Pittsburgh. The film is structured in 3 movements. The first centers on the wedding of Steve, played by John Savage. The second takes place in Vietnam. And the third takes place back in their town and is the aftermath after their survival from Vietnam.
Let's talk about some production details. As we already mentioned, The Deer Hunter had a limited release in December of 1978, followed by a wider release on February 23rd, 1979. It had a budget of around $15 million and made roughly $49 million at the box office. It was produced by EMI Films and distributed by Universal Pictures. It also won Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, that would be Christopher Walken, Best Sound, and Best Film Editing. The Vietnam scenes were filmed in Thailand, and the river scenes, that was the River Kwai.
From the movie? The Bridge Over the River Kwai?
From the Bridge Over the River Kwai, but Bridge Over the River Kwai wasn't filmed at the River Kwai. It was filmed elsewhere in Burma, I believe.
I will say that in rewatching this film and watching them, those scenes in the river and the scenes of them floating down the river, it was very effective.
Hey, let's talk about this cast. Robert De Niro played Michael, and a little bit of trivia here, Roy Scheider was originally casted to play him.
I could see that, honestly. I could see Roy Scheider playing the Michael character. Christopher Walken played Nick, who is probably one of the most interesting characters in this entire movie. Obviously, Michael drives a lot of the action and he's in virtually every scene, but Nick is portrayed by Christopher Walken amazingly.
Do you know what I found funny? This may be one of the earliest Christopher Walken performances that I remember seeing, and he wasn't Christopher Walkening all over the place with that exaggerated manner of speech that he is so well known for. I don't know if I was expecting that.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I agree with you. He did not have that sort of, that almost affected or affectation of speech, which is effective in his other movies. But he was great in this movie. He really was.
Yeah,
Understated. It was powerful. It was very powerful.
Enjoyed him a lot. John Savage played Stephen. And I have to admit, I looked at John Savage's filmography, and he's played in a lot, and he's still appearing in television productions and films, and he has things that are in the works. But I cannot for the life of me remember him in any other film. And when you try to look up information about him, it always says he's best known for The Deer Hunter.
So we also get to talk about Meryl Streep, who played Linda. It turns out, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we talk about the actor who played Stan, but Meryl Streep is in this movie kind of as not a deeply written character. Her amazing acting chops are not shown to their full potential, but when you hear more about why she was in this production, it'll make a little more sense.
There were two other guys. There was John, and I don't remember the actor who played him, but he was the owner of the bar.
Yeah, the heavier set guy.
And then there was also Axel, who was part of the group of friends who would go out hunting.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that the actor who played Axel was not actually an actor. When Robert De Niro was preparing for the role, he would go into blue-collar bars to kind of pick up on speech patterns and how blue-collar men who work at steel factories act. And he struck up a conversation with Chuck Aspergen, and he said, this guy's really good. He would be good in the film. And this was the only film credit that he had. And he was amazing.
Yeah.
He's
quite good. Some people have natural talent like that. And he was essentially playing somebody from his town, probably doing the things that they do. So,
Matt, let's do a little actor spotlight. Let's talk about John Cazale.
I have quite a bit of information about John Cazale. He is such a good actor that you fall into the trap of disliking him.
Yes.
Because he's so good. You have to be careful because the guy was portraying somebody. But anyway, let's get into it. Actor John Cazale's performance as Stan in The Deer Hunter is a standout. It brought a mix of comic relief and tension to the group of steelworker friends from Pennsylvania. Michael's intensity needed a target because if it had been unleashed on someone more serious than Stan, we would have thought Michael was a jerk all the time, not this. So it was a great foil, and he's super fussy. He's always fixing his hair. Mm-hmm. He fancies himself a ladies' man, but clearly not real good at it. And, it's pretty funny because there's scenes all through the movie where he's asking whether his date is attractive and Michael's telling him no, which is hilarious. It's a funny scene, does it great. Brings a .38 revolver on a Pennsylvania hunting trip, which is typically Pennsylvania hunting is rifles, right? Because you're up in the mountains and stuff. I will have to point out, though, that there are no mountains in Pennsylvania that look like the mountains they were hunting in. There are no snow-capped mountains in Pennsylvania. But the idea of what they're trying to do, they're doing a certain kind of hunting, which is they're stalking. And having John Cazale's Stan kind of be along the trip is, jarring in its doesn't fit, right? His whole personality doesn't fit. He's not serious about it. He forgets his boots. Years before, he clearly forgot his socks and forgot his gloves. And, we see this in the scene with Michael on the hunting trip where Michael's had enough, right? It's been years. And he gives you a clue into the idea that Michael knows he's leaving. And he feels like these guys need to take care of themselves. He can no longer take care of them. Mm-hmm. And so he's trying to set that bit almost like a parent saying, you need to pack your own bag. And if you forget stuff, well, you got to live with it. Right. And that's what I took from that. And Cazale's goofiness and insecurity really is a great foil for that scene. And I think it's one of the reasons this movie works well is using Stan in that way. And I will say the other part that's very interesting about Cazale is he was diagnosed with lung cancer, terminal lung cancer, before filming even started. The film studio didn't want to insure him because they knew he had terminal cancer and he was dying. So the director went ahead and shot all his scenes up front. So he upfronted all the scenes that John Cazale was in, so that if he succumbed during filming, they would still have his parts in the can. And he did survive filming, but he did die shortly thereafter. The other interesting part about this is, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, is Meryl Streep was in this movie. Meryl Streep and John Cazale were in a very serious, committed relationship at the time. And she was very concerned with his health. So she let it be known that having her in the movie would be a great way for her to be able to keep an eye on John, to make sure he's not overexerting himself, and that she could be there and, to be honest with you, spend as much time with him. The writing's on the wall. It's really a moving kind of situation. The other thing about John Cazale is he literally was in 5 films, and all of them were fantastic hits. So I think I can name them off. Obviously, he was in The Conversation, which we have reviewed here. He was in The Godfather. He was in The Godfather Part 2. He was in Dog Day Afternoon. And of course, he was in The Deer Hunter. It's an amazing repertoire of films to be in and then to pass away. I mean, I think we kind of missed a great one here, but, he sure gave us a lot while he was with us. And it's quite sad to think that he passed away after these films. I think he would have gone on to be an amazing senior statesman of film. He would have been a great guy to listen to hear, talk about his stories. We really lost something there. And I think it also put probably a pretty indelible mark on, Meryl Streep's acting going forward the rest of her life. I mean, obviously she's a national treasure. Meryl Streep is an amazing actress. And I think the roles she's most known for are those ones where she's really emoting deep, deep emotion and emotional loss. And you can kind of get where some of this might have come from.
Sure.
I know it went along on and on about it, but it was pretty moving to hear about that. I always just sort of didn't even know much about John Cazale. And one of the best things about doing this podcast is even we do a little bit of research and we find stuff that we didn't know about. And that's one that was very interesting. And I am here to say that I am happy that I learned this, and I'm happy to realize that my dislike for the character Stan was probably 100% due to his good acting.
So you mentioned that he was in The Conversation. Do you remember what his character's name was in The Conversation?
I think it was Stan again.
It was Stan.
Yeah.
Yes.
And clearly the guy would have been the best guy in the world to talk to. He acted with De Niro. He acted
Cimino. He acted with Hackman. He worked with Coppola twice. I mean, 3 times actually.
Yeah, amazing. What a loss.
I had not put together John Cazale until we did The Conversation. And then I was like, he looks so familiar to me. Of course, this is Fredo. And then you look at his IMDb page and it's like, oh, wow, this is amazing. So I was glad to see him in Deer Hunter. This was really good.
Yeah, and I think his role, I mean, I can see why Michael Cimino fought to have him in the film, because I think he was the perfect foil for Michael's intensity.
Yes. Yes. Well, let's talk about the filmmakers now. The director of cinematography was Vilmos Zsigmond, whose work we've already seen in McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Deliverance. And we will see him again this season in Scarecrow and The Long Goodbye. He also has an audio commentary on the Blu-ray for The Deer Hunter, and I picked up some trivia that I did not know. So first of all, the director of photography is not the guy who is actually operating the camera. For some reason, I always thought that the cinematographer was the camera operator. He's not. He's the guy who is in charge of the camera operator, the gaffers who set up the lights, and he works with the director to get his vision up on the screen. And I thought that was interesting. When they shot this film, it was shot during the summer in Pennsylvania. Do you know how hard it is to make Pennsylvania look like winter during the summer?
Yes, because it's 100% green.
They were plucking leaves from the trees so that it would look like leaves had dropped.
Right.
And then they sprayed some chemical that would brown the grass up to give it that winter look
dormant,
that you
winter
expect.
dormant. And then, of course, it was wet, which
Yes.
is absolutely just like Pennsylvania in the winter. It's always wet and nasty if it's not frozen and dangerous.
Well, the reason why you saw snow on the mountain was because they filmed those in Seattle.
Yeah, it's clearly. I mean, they're the wrong kind of mountains.
It's the wrong kind of mountain. I wouldn't know about the particulars of Pennsylvania, but I know that the style of mountains on this coast versus out on the West Coast is much different looking. Music, I know you had to have noticed the music. It was...
Yeah, I noticed. The one thing I was going to say is I did notice the music on this film, and it was the main thing. What I noticed is there was some... I'm gonna throw a guess out here because music is not my thing.
Go for it.
But I'm going to say in most of those scenes at the hunting and the mountains, it sounded like Gregorian chant. Or something along those lines.
What I would say is that it felt like it was like a church choral.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So
exactly.
it gave you this idea like you're in some place that's holy.
Yeah. The cathedral of the hunt.
And of course, the theme song from The Deer Hunter is the guitar piece that's played throughout. That's called Cavatina. And that was performed by Australian guitarist John Williams.
The music I'm getting better about noticing the music in movies, not just having it as an afterthought or as a flow for me. So I definitely did notice that. And I noticed the music at the wedding and,
what was that song? I love you, baby.
Yeah.
Right. Did you notice that people were singing the song?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, whenever you see a movie and they're at a party and everyone's either dancing or whatever, there's no music in there, right? So that they can get the actors talking, and they have a nice good bass and then they put the song. No, they recorded the music right there with that band playing. And I saw someone singing in time to that song. And I'm like, holy cow, they were
actually playing
live.
the music. Huh?
This is live. That's why I think maybe in some cases it was a little hard to hear them.
Yeah. This was very familiar to me in these scenes, the wedding scenes. I had gone to a wedding of who remained very, very good friends of our family, and it was exactly like the wedding in The Deer Hunter. So the dancing, the music, the collecting of the money for the bride price, all of that stuff that went on in that wedding that you saw going on, all happened. And I went to a wedding that was like that. And then a few years later, when I'm watching The Deer Hunter, I'm like, hey, I have been there. I have been to that wedding. It was crazy. Let's talk about Michael Cimino, the film's director and co-writer. He's a fascinating figure whose career really is the classic Hollywood rise and fall story. He was born in 1939. He started out studying architecture and dramatic arts before breaking into the industry, starting out with commercials and screenwriting gigs. He co-wrote the screenplay for Silent Running, directed by Douglas Trumbull, and he also contributed to Magnum Force, the Dirty Harry sequel. Cimino's directorial debut was the heist comedy Thunderbolt and Lightfolk, one of my favorite movies, by the way, starring Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges, which showed his knack for character-driven stories. The Deer Hunter was his sophomore effort and a massive triumph. Obviously, he won 5 Oscars for this, including Best Picture, Best Director. Cimino's epic Western Heaven's Gate in 1980 became one of cinema's most infamous disasters, ballooning from a $7.5 million budget to over $40 million due to endless reshoots and perfectionism. The film flopped spectacularly at the box office, losing United Artists an estimated $37 million and effectively bankrupting United Artists. They were sold to MGM for pennies on the dollar after this, and United Artists basically ceased to be after that. And he is largely blamed for that.
This film was 400% over budget.
Yeah.
Just let that sink in.
Yeah, 400%. Yeah, that's crazy. He only directed a handful of films later, and I think they pretty limited. They probably put a very close leash on him, wanting to tap into his talent, but not also lose their shirts. So it was The Year of the Dragon from 1985, The Sicilian in 87, before largely retreating from Hollywood. He passed away in 2016, but people are looking back at his work and sort of seeing what a visionary he really was, but what amazing effort on this film. really. And think about it. It was like, what is his second film?
Right.
That's crazy. That kind of success. And I did not realize Christopher Walken won an Oscar so early in his career.
Sure. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, we're going to step aside for another quick break. And when we come back, we'll move into spoiler territory. We're going to see you on the other side.
Hey, this is Matt.
And I'm Dirk.
We're just out here riding our bikes, circling the cul-de-sac, talking about the movies, music, and TV shows that we all love and remember, but just as easily could have fallen by the wayside and been forgotten.
These are the tales of creative chaos, last-minute miracles, and lightning strikes no one saw coming. So settle in, because every legend has a backstory, and sometimes the best ones start by mistake. This is where we talk about and discuss
the accidental legends.
Welcome back. I've been kind of fascinated how divided critics are on the first act, the whole wedding scene, and how long it is. What were your thoughts on that?
To me, Act 1 sets up the relationships of the people, the relationships of these main protagonists that are going to be, basically pushed forward into the Vietnam War. It's very important, in my opinion, to lay that groundwork and to understand what's happening. So to me, it was like you get to know the people, you get to know them. They're working in a steel mill. There was a little bit of disjointedness on, like, were you getting out on a Thursday night and getting married and then you're going hunting for the weekend? It was a little weird on that. That whole timeline was kind of jumbled to me.
Well, this is how I saw it. Michael, Nick, and Steven, they have signed up to go to Vietnam. This is their last day of working. And now Steven, he's going to get married before he goes off.
Right.
And so they have this wedding. They're going to get in one last deer hunt. And so they're cramming a lot of life in prior to leaving.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. There was an idea that these guys have been going along for a while in this pattern because they referenced many previous deer hunts. They referenced the idea that these guys, when they walked through the steer mill, were saying goodbye to everybody. They had been there a long, long time, right? So this had been their life since graduating from high school, most likely, right?
Right.
So, and these guys are looking like they're 25, maybe. So, I mean, it's been 10 years, maybe 8 years they've been doing this. They're living their life. There's obviously some stuff going on with Steven getting married, and there is a very interesting part in there where he basically admits to Nick that he's never really had relations with the woman he's going to marry, although it's pretty well understood that she's pregnant already, so by another man. So, there's that whole kind of what's underlying a lot of interpersonal things that are happening. I was going to say there's also, during the wedding, it's pretty clear that Mike and Nick's then girlfriend have had a relationship because they're kind of forced to dance together and they're kind of trying to pretend like they're not dancing together. And you know what I mean? It's very awkward.
There was obvious attraction, I think, between Linda and Nick and Michael. And I just think that was just a very awkward, because I think Nick and Linda were getting engaged or had gotten engaged.
Yeah, he wanted to marry her when he came back. He said, let's get married. But I think they were also very casual, because I think you find out, and I think this was revealed, this might be a spoiler, this was revealed by the filmmaker in some interviews that later that Steven's bride was actually carrying Nick's baby.
Ooh.
So that baby is Nick's baby. And you do get a confirmation in that as we get back from the war, that baby's been born. And he has a head of blonde hair, just like Nick, not like
Steven or his wife.
Right. It totally looks like not the right thing. So there's that. And you also see Michael takes like a double take at the kid when he first sees the kid, when he's going to try to find where Steven is.
What did you think about the scene where the veteran comes in to the VFW and goes off to the bar?
Well, I thought it was sort of bringing in and foreshadowing a little bit of what's going to happen in the future. Sort of, these guys are possibly don't have any idea what they're getting into.
I have two thoughts on this. And in this case, they're seeing this soldier. They're not even in yet. And they're looking at this they're talking with this vet. This vet has this 1,000-yard stare, right? That he is just looking off at it. And he has this look of like, you guys don't even know what you're about to go into. And I thought that scene was riveting because it's foreshadowing, and then the other area of foreshadow was when in the wedding ritual, there was a Slavic ritual where the bride and the groom, they would drink from this
It's like
wine.
loving cup. That's
Loving,
like two
yeah.
cups hooked together.
And as they're drinking, the idea is to not spill anything. And of course, the bride spills a little bit of red wine on her dress, which maybe was foretelling of what was going to happen with Steve. There is a scene after the wedding where Nick and Mike are running down the street, and
Yes.
De Niro's character is stripping off his clothes.
Yeah.
And they end up underneath a light. And there is a great conversation there because Mike is talking with Nick, and he's starting to get the idea, okay, so there might not be quite as much bravado on his side. And Nick is saying, hey, if something happens, don't leave me over there.
Yeah, you got to bring me back.
You got to bring me back. And then, but after the wedding, they go off on this hunt. Let's get to it. But, this is where we get that interaction between Mike and Stan, where Stan has forgotten his boots and Mike's like, hey, look, I'm not going to be around here to take care of you. You need to start doing this for yourself.
Yeah, he also just says, I said no.
Yeah.
So, and because at one point Nick tries to step in and gives him the boots, and he's got his boots over his shoulder. And at that time, you sort of see a glimpse under the basket of Michael's extreme intensity. Like, no, I said no. And that's how we're going to do this. And we see that come up again later in other scenes.
Before we move into Vietnam, they finish the hunt and Mike has stalked this deer. Is that what you were saying, that they were stalking? And then you have someone like, who was it, John and Axel? They're just kind of shooting and going off. They're
drinking.
Yeah, that they were more into that. When they're done with the hunt, they go back to the bar. And I love this about the actor who played John. He actually learned that piece of music and he played that on the piano. And it bookends with the ending of the movie where he's playing and it just captures everyone's attention. And then we move into Act 2 with Vietnam. It's almost like, boom, you're there. And it's a little disjointing, right? At this point, Nick and Steve, I think, are part of a unit. Mm-hmm. And Mike is on some other unit, and somehow they miraculously all are at the same place.
Yeah, they happen to get to this. And I think one of the things is, I think Mike goes off and ends up he's a Green Beret. He's a Ranger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's obviously in sort of a different kind of thing, but they get thrown in together with this other unit. They get off the helicopter, and then things take a turn for the worse, and all three of them get captured. But you don't see any of that. You just see sort of a big group of Viet Cong coming, and the next thing you know, you're at the river. Right?
And this they're in this makeshift prison that's floating on the river, and there's like 2 levels, and down at the bottom level they keep everyone, and then upstairs they're playing what I found to be just a very horrifying game of Russian roulette.
They're forcing the captured soldiers. Some of them, I think one of them is a South Vietnamese soldier, and then some American soldiers. And they're basically just piling up the dead bodies from this game. They're betting on it. It's all loud. And the guy who's running the game is slapping them and yelling and getting them to play the game. The idea of this is maybe not 100% accurate, but the idea is to portray the random, senseless violence that was war in general and the Vietnam War in particular. But I think it's important to talk about this with Stephen beforehand.
Sure.
Stephen was falling apart underneath.
Oh, yeah.
Every time the gun went off or every time the gun didn't go off, Stephen was falling apart. And Michael was basically trying to get him, to pull himself together. You gotta pull yourself together. And he's clearly, that acting, John Savage's acting in that is amazing because you can see he is falling apart. The click, and he just loses it. And then he gets pulled up and has to do it. And, the gun does go off and it grazes them, and they're so mad that they basically just pick them up and throw them in this sort of pit with, that's underwater 90%, and like maybe there's an inch of headspace to be able to, and they're floating around.
Sure.
And that's where John is. Well, he's freaking out in there.
Mike has a plan. He's a Green Beret. He's kind of the leader from Act 1. He has his head together, and he has a plan for how they can escape. Was this a good plan?
I think it was the only plan you could have done, right?
So he had them put 3 bullets.
He convinces them to put 3 bullets, and he talks to Nick about it. And Nick's like, "You're out of your mind. This is crazy."
And he works it so that it's him versus Nick.
Right.
And every time he puts the gun to his head, I have to be very honest. The first time I watched this film, I had to close my eyes a couple times. It was pretty rough.
Well, and the craziest thing is that he puts 3 bullets in, he spins it, he hands it. Michael does it first, pulls the trigger and goes click. And then he hands the gun over to Nick, and he's freaking out because it's 3 bullets and 1 has already been blank. So that means out of 5 remaining shells, 2 of them are blank, 3 of them have bullets. And he ends up pulling the trigger and it's empty. And of course, Nick freaks out. The tension is amazing. They had talked about this plan too before. This is, I'm going to shoot him, and you got to pick a gun up and shoot the rest of them because I don't have enough bullets to shoot everybody. But they escape. They go get Steven out of the basket. Nick has been shot in the leg during this altercation, and they're floating down the river to try to save themselves.
Did you notice that there's a lot of archival footage from the war that was shown?
Yeah, they used real footage.
They would take the 16 millimeter, they would blow it up, and then they would color match and grain match their footage so that it would work in. Nick actually gets rescued.
Yeah. The helicopter comes, they've caught themselves on a bridge, and the 3 of them are trying to get on the helicopter, but it's nearly impossible. But Nick gets pulled.
Mike and Steven drop, and Steven hits his leg on a rock in the water, has a massive fracture.
Compound fracture.
Back at the hospital, Nick is recovering. It's like he checks out at this point. He starts to forget everything about who he is. I don't know. He's like blocking it out or something.
Oh, I think he was in like the full throes of a terrible PTSD, because if he had been with Mike or with Steve, they would have been able to tell the doctors, this is what we went through. And the doctors would have immediately put them into some kind of psychological something. Instead, they just think he's kind of a coward or something because he's crying at some point. They basically get him in a uniform and get him out, which is insane.
He winds up in Saigon. And some of this part here is where it kind of gets a little strange, but he's in Saigon and he comes across a Russian roulette gambling hall. At the same time, Mike just so happens to be in Saigon at the same time.
At the
same
season. Show.
At the same place.
They're both drawn like moths to a flame to this remembrance of their trauma. The whole thing is that this Frenchman who's kind of running this show immediately identifies Nick as somebody who would do this game and he could make a lot of money on. And he gets him in there. And what happens in the scene is that 2 of them are doing it. They're getting ready. One of them's really scared about it. And Nick's standing there and he just picks up the gun and he holds it against the kid's head and click. And then he holds it to his own head, click. And the Frenchman then drags him out before Mike, who sees him, can get to him. And they disappear into the crowds. And that's the last you see of Nick for a very long time.
You know, real quick, in the scene where Mike is coming home and he's in the cab and he doesn't want to stop at his home, I didn't realize at that point he had no idea if Steve was alive, if Nick was alive. He was the protector. He was the leader. And he comes back and the PTSD and the Russian roulette notwithstanding, he's just not ready for that. And I didn't put it together that he didn't even know that his friends were alive or not.
But the other interesting thing is Mike ultimately does get in touch with Steven.
Yes.
Steven has lost both his legs. He's in a electrified wheelchair and he's at the VA hospital recovering, quote unquote, but really has no plans to get out, to leave, to do anything. And he ultimately shows Mike a drawer full of money that his
Just
wife's been
hundreds.
sending him. Hundreds and hundreds of $100 bills. And obviously,
that who's been sending him?
Well, his wife's been sending him socks and this money. This was another key in to why Nick was sending the money to his wife, because that was his kid that she was pregnant with.
I didn't put that together.
Yeah. So there's some of that. But she sends it to Steven saying, I don't understand this. I think she's packing it in with the socks and sending him this money. But this tells Mike immediately that Nick is alive because Nick's sending the money.
How cool was the effect of Steven in the wheelchair with no legs?
Oh, it was great.
And think about it. No blue screen.
Yeah,
I mean, it was so good. The first time I'm looking at it, and I'm like going, okay, how, like, you know, Lieutenant Dan, you always see the behind the scenes where they have the socks and all that on the they blue screen out. But wow, this is 1977 when they're filming it. And it was just such a
that's why they had to put him in an electric wheelchair, because they had to put the battery underneath to so where his folded legs would be behind.
Right.
And they did a great job. It was a great job.
It was very effective.
Yes.
By the way, thank you. I didn't even put together that he was sending the money because of his son.
Yeah.
I didn't get that. That was awesome.
Something. I mean, it's crazy because he was
totally
disjointed. Yeah. You have to understand how much money this was, because think about it. Mike's going to get on a plane and fly to Southeast Asia. He gets there and he has to try to find him. So he finds that Frenchman and he basically offers him so much money that the Frenchman's like, all right, fine, I'll take you, and takes him by boat, which I thought was a little bit interesting because the river plays another part in this whole thing, and the Russian roulette, right? So you got the boat, you got the river, you got the Russian roulette. It kind of was a good tie-in to me with the original water and Russian roulette. So before it was Russian roulette floating in the water, this was water to the Russian roulette. So they're bookending it to me.
And also, like, going back to the wedding scene where they're underneath the light and Nick's saying, don't leave me over there. So now Mike is honoring that. He's there to get him back.
Yeah.
And
but the only way he can get in front of him is to play.
So the sad things for me was that Nick doesn't even recognize him anymore.
Nope.
Even though he says, yeah, he doesn't, right? He's gone. And the final scene, it was very moving. I mean, it was very good, very tragic.
Yeah. And we left out a huge thing that we should have talked about, because it was a very big central theme in this whole thing, was the whole idea of the one shot.
Yes.
One shot. So we didn't talk about it, but in the hunting, and in the run up to the hunting, you had Mike. He's like, this is this. You know, he holds out a bullet, a 30, I think it's a 30-30, but a bullet he's going to use to hunt this deer. And it's like, this isn't anything else. This is this. And then it's like one shot. He hunts one shot. He doesn't hunt and jack more shells in and shoot like his two bozo friends. He takes the one shot, and that's it. And that comes full circle at the end, because that's the one sentence that breaks through to Nick. He's like, you know, one shot. And he immediately picks up the gun and he loses the game. Yeah, it was just so close, so heartbreaking.
The final scene of the movie, they're back at the bar. They had the funeral of Nick, and John is in the back. He's starting to cook scrambled eggs, and he starts singing God Bless America.
Yeah.
And eventually the others inside the bar, they start picking this up. What were your thoughts on that? How did you interpret that?
Yeah, I'm going to be cynical. I think it was...
No, be cynical.
I think it was, they put it in the movie because this was such a controversial movie about the war. The war was already controversial. We had huge protests in America about it. You had people protesting the Vietnam War. You had the Kent State Massacre. People were dying. And this was one of the first movies, and it portrayed the soldiers as somewhat heroic, which was not the take that most people were doing. And I think it was a nod to middle America to say, we're not going to beat up these people, these men that went over there and fought this in this terrible situation. So that's what I think they put it in there for, was to kind of ease the everyman conscience. But that's, you know, that might be totally rough.
I found it to be almost ironic. You know, it's a very patriotic song, and you're singing it. And at the end of this film, during this, you know, potentially very sad moment for these people.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like an odd song to be singing. So it felt like it was out of place.
Mm-hmm.
But, it bookends with the nocturne that John was playing prior to him going to Vietnam. And I think in one way, just in the simple irony of the song, it was also very sad.
Before we get to our final verdict, I think we need to take one more quick break. We'll be right back.
And now it's time for the big question. Does the Deer Hunter groove or did it skip a beat? Matt?
This is a complex movie. It was award-winning. I think I can see why. But for my modern palate, I thought it dragged a little bit, especially in the scenes after Mike returns from the war. That just went on far too long. The other thing I had problems with, which a lot of people have called out, is that Mike wears a beard through the entire movie, even when he's a Green Beret, which was absolutely against the rules in the Army at the time. You could have maybe a mustache, but you could not have a full beard because, basically it was because your gas mask wouldn't fit. Now, I have heard that it was a conscious choice by the director to set Mike apart to show his strangeness from everything, right? But my problem with that is he had a beard at the beginning, he had a beard at the end, he had a beard all the time. It would have been far stranger to me for him to come back without a beard, because that's not who we knew him. So I think that was a poor decision, and I don't like it. So I will say, in summary, without further ado, that this movie grooves through the ages, but I think it has lost a tiny bit of luster because the pacing could be better. In terms of how the acting is done, I don't think there's any complaint. But other than that, I think it grooves.
Matt, there is a Mount Rushmore of Vietnam movies. You have Platoon, Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, and then you have The Deer Hunter. And I also felt that the film dragged, but for me, it was in Act 1, not Act 3. But you're not wrong. The beard, when he was in his dress uniform, was a tad off-putting to me for other reasons. This film is good, and I would like to say that if you were to compare The Deer Hunter to Apocalypse Now, I think The Deer Hunter is really more about the effect that the war had on people who had come home, particularly blue-collar workers who typically tend to bear the brunt of these kinds of operations, whereas Apocalypse Now was there to show the craziness of the war, the excess. It was napalm-fueled madness. The acting in this film was great. The cinematography was great. Overall, for me, it also grooves. I'm not going to condition that at all. So there you go. Before we wrap up, we're heading into a travel section. I've changed things up on us, Matt. I've decided to pair The Last Detail with Jack Nicholson and Dennis Quaid with Scarecrow, which has Al Pacino and Gene Hackman. Two great road movies from the decade. I hope you haven't seen either one of them, because I kind of want to know which one we like at the end best.
I have seen The Last Detail. I remember it. I know what it's about, but I'm not looking at it with this critical eye that I have gained since doing this podcast.
Can I give you a quick spoiler?
Sure.
Jack Nicholson is so good as Billy Badusky. Oh my gosh, he is so good. So we got a fun stretch ahead.
All right. Sounds good. And so that wraps up our show for today. If you have a question or comment, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us through our website at cinematicflashback.com.
Thanks for listening to the Cinematic Flashback Podcast. Join us next time as we dive into another classic from the 1970s. We'll see you then.
It's the Cinematic Flashback, baby, we'll take you there.
Well, guys, I won't be seeing you for a while. Where are you going? I've joined the Naval Reserve. Well, I'm not going to let anything happen to my best friend. I'm joining too.
Well, I'm not going to let anything happen to my two best customers. I'm joining too.
Gee, thanks, guys. This is just like the Deer Hunter.
The deer hunter? That reminds me. Didimo! I'm sorry, guys. We're shutting down for a while. Sorry.